A black man walks his loyal dog through a quiet park when a group of racist police officers approaches, their intentions clear and hostile. What they don't realize is that this man isn't just any civilian, he's a highly decorated military officer, trained in combat and precision. As tensions rise, his calm demeanor hides a storm of unmatched skills ready to explode at any moment. When their aggression reaches a boiling point, they find out too late that they've underestimated the wrong man. Don't miss the full story. Subscribe and like our YouTube channel to see how this incredible encounter unfolds. The morning began like any other, the man strolling through the park with his loyal dog trotting beside him. His calm demeanor and the disciplined movements of the dog hinted at years of training. The air seemed serene, but the unease stirred as a patrol car rolled up slowly, its occupants observing him intently. The officers exchanged glances, their smirks subtle but loaded with condescension. Their decision to approach was less about enforcing the law and more about their own biases. They stepped out, posturing authority, their eyes locking onto the man who remained still, his hand resting lightly on the dog's leash. The officers began their confrontation with veiled accusations, their tone sharp and probing. They questioned his presence, his purpose in the area, and the dog's breed. The man's responses were calm, measured, and unyielding, betraying no hint of the rising tension beneath the surface. As the exchange grew more heated, the dog began to sense the hostility, its ears twitching and posture becoming alert. One officer's hand hovered near his baton, while the other's fingers toyed with the edge of his radio. The man noticed every movement, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly, calculating the risks and possible outcomes. In a sudden move, one officer demanded the man provide identification. The tone was neither courteous nor professional. The man hesitated, his mind racing through the implications of compliance versus resistance. He reached into his pocket slowly, producing his ID, which revealed his rank and commendations as a decorated military officer. The officer took it, his eyes scanning the card before his expression twisted into a sneer. The revelation of the man's status did not quell their intentions, but seemed to provoke them further. They began making veiled threats, insinuating that not even his accolades could shield him from trouble. The man's grip tightened on the leash, his calm demeanor now a controlled restraint of the storm within. As tensions reached their peak, another officer's arrival escalated the situation. This newcomer carried an air of authority, but his words mirrored the same prejudices. The man realized that reasoning was futile. He subtly adjusted his stance, bracing for an outcome he had tried to avoid. When the officer's posturing turned into action, attempting to seize the dog under the pretense of it being a threat, the man acted. With a command that carried the weight of military precision, the dog responded, positioning itself defensively. The officers hesitated, underestimating the discipline and training instilled in both man and animal. The man's movements were swift and deliberate. Years of combat training manifested in his ability to disarm one officer before the other could react. The dog, following its training, diffused the aggression of the second officer with calculated precision, ensuring no harm but asserting control. The third officer's attempt to draw his weapon was thwarted as the man anticipated the move, his hand intercepting and disarming him in a single fluid motion. The officers found themselves on the defensive, their arrogance crumbling under the realization that they had misjudged their target. Before reinforcements could arrive, the man secured his exit, his actions decisive yet restrained. He left the officers incapacitated but unharmed, a testament to his discipline and moral code. As he disappeared into the distance with his dog, the echoes of the encounter lingered, leaving the officers to grapple with their failure and the undeniable truth that they had underestimated the wrong man. The evening air carried a palpable tension as the streets buzzed with quiet murmurs. Across town, the racially charged police group gathered in a back room, their faces tight with anger and false entitlement. Leading them was Officer Trent, a man hardened by years of unchecked power and a reputation for instigating aggression against minorities. He leaned against a table, his voice sharp and commanding as he addressed his group. They were planning their next move against Elijah, the unassuming black man who had unwittingly become their target. Unbeknownst to them, Elijah was no ordinary civilian. The awards on his mantelpiece at home, the medals he'd earned through service and sacrifice, and the disciplined mind honed through years of military training made him a formidable force. But to Trent and his group, he was nothing more than another opportunity to assert their skewed beliefs. At the same time, Elijah sat at his modest kitchen table, his dog Ranger resting loyally at his feet. A subtle unease lingered in the room as Elijah reviewed old maps and photos, remnants of his time in the military. Ranger's ears perked up as if sensing the storm that was about to descend. Elijah gently stroked his companion's head, his mind already calculating the risks he might face in the days ahead. Back at the precinct, Trent's group solidified their strategy. The plan was clear: corner Elijah during his evening run with Ranger. They would claim suspicion of illegal activity, a weak pretense that had worked for them before. Their confidence stemmed from years of systemic bias, enabling them to act without fear of repercussions. But this time, they had underestimated their adversary. The following night, Elijah set out for his usual route through the neighborhood. Ranger trotted beside him, a silent but alert partner. The streets were dimly lit, with only the occasional car passing by. Elijah's mind wandered to memories of missions past, where every step required precision and every decision held life-or-death consequences. He didn't know that tonight would demand those same skills. From the shadows, Trent's group observed. Their unmarked car crawled to a halt a few blocks away, and they exited with calculated movements. Trent's hand rested on his baton, his expression dark with anticipation. Elijah's steps slowed. Ranger's low growl was the only warning before the group emerged, their intentions clear. Trent's voice carried across the empty street, laced with authority and veiled menace. Elijah turned to face them, his posture straight and calm, but his eyes sharp and unyielding. Ranger stood protectively at his side, muscles taut with readiness. The confrontation escalated quickly. Trent approached with a rehearsed air of dominance, accusing Elijah of suspicious behavior. Elijah's voice was steady as he calmly questioned their motives, his words cutting through their facade. Trent's irritation flared, his arrogance blinding him to the subtle shift in the balance of power. Elijah's military instincts had kicked in, assessing every angle and anticipating their moves. When Trent reached for his baton, Elijah reacted with precision. In a single fluid motion, he deflected the strike and stepped back, his stance defensive but measured. Ranger barked sharply, a warning that reverberated through the street. The officers hesitated, their confidence momentarily shaken by the unexpected resistance. Trent barked orders, sending 2 of his men to flank Elijah. But Elijah's movements were swift and deliberate, a testament to his years of training. He maneuvered with ease, neutralizing one officer's attempt to grab him while keeping the others at bay. Ranger's presence added another layer of unpredictability, his growls and quick movements forcing the group to split their focus. As the struggle continued, Trent's frustration grew. He underestimated the depth of Elijah's capabilities, and now his group was faltering. The sound of sirens in the distance added urgency to the scene. A passerby had called for help, their voice carrying a note of alarm at the unfolding chaos. Trent's group began to falter, their unity unraveling under the weight of their miscalculation. Elijah saw the opening and acted decisively. With a swift, calculated move, he disarmed Trent and sent the baton skidding across the pavement. The other officers hesitated, their confidence waning in the face of Elijah's resilience. Ranger stood at Elijah's side, his eyes locked on the remaining threats. The sirens grew louder, and the standoff reached its peak. Trent's arrogance had turned to desperation as he realized the tide was turning against him. Elijah's voice cut through the tension, calm but firm, as he addressed the group. He spoke of accountability, of the systemic flaws that enabled their actions, and of the strength that came from standing against oppression. The police cars arrived, their lights casting an eerie glow on the scene. Trent's group was caught off guard, their earlier bravado replaced by uncertainty. Fellow officers stepped out, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern as they took in the scene. Trent's attempt to justify his actions fell flat, his words hollow against the weight of Elijah's truth. In the aftermath, Trent and his group faced scrutiny. Their actions were called into question, and their unchecked power began to crumble under the weight of accountability. For Elijah, the night was a reminder of the battles he continued to fight, both visible and unseen. As he walked away with Ranger, the quiet strength in his stride spoke volumes. He was not just a survivor but a warrior, standing firm in the face of injustice and ready for whatever came next. The day unfolded with a restless energy that seemed to grip both antagonists and allies alike. The tension from the earlier confrontations lingered like an invisible fog, shaping the movements of every character involved. In a dimly lit conference room, the officers sat in uneasy silence, their frustration palpable. Chief Collins leaned forward, his fists clenched on the table as he addressed his subordinates. His tone, sharp and unyielding, cut through the room like a knife. He recounted the failed attempt to subdue the man and his dog, emphasizing how they had underestimated their target. The chief's words were laced with a mix of anger and fear as he detailed the skills their target had displayed. The officers exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others averting their eyes in shame. Their pride as enforcers of the law had taken a significant blow. Collins' voice rose, commanding their attention as he outlined a new plan, one that left no room for failure. This time, they would be prepared, exploiting every weakness they could identify. Meanwhile, across town, the man and his loyal dog Shadow prepared themselves for what they knew was inevitable. The earlier encounter had confirmed their suspicions. This was not just a random act of hostility. It was a calculated move driven by deep-seated prejudice and a desire to assert dominance. The man, an experienced officer with an impeccable military record, analyzed the situation with precision. His calm demeanor masked the storm brewing within. As he paced the small space, Shadow's eyes followed him closely. The bond between them was unshakable, forged in the heat of countless operations. The dog's ears perked up at every sound, its body poised for action. The man's mind raced with strategies, anticipating the moves of his adversaries and preparing countermeasures. In another part of the city, the tension among the officers continued to mount. Officer Graham, known for his brash and impulsive nature, voiced his frustrations. His words carried an undertone of resentment, directed not only at their target but also at his fellow officers. He questioned their competence and hinted at his own willingness to take extreme measures. The room grew tense as his words hung in the air, challenging the authority of Chief Collins. Collins' gaze hardened as he addressed Graham's outburst. He reminded them all of the stakes, emphasizing the need for unity and focus. The chief's commanding presence quelled the dissent, but the cracks in their solidarity were evident. Graham's defiance lingered, a spark waiting to ignite. As the officers regrouped and refined their plan, the man's preparations took on a sense of urgency. He contacted trusted allies, sharing details of the unfolding situation. Among them was an old friend from his military days, a tech-savvy individual who had assisted him in numerous operations. The friend's expertise proved invaluable as they worked to uncover the motivations and tactics of the officers targeting him. The digital trail revealed a disturbing pattern. The officers had a history of targeting individuals based on race, using their positions of power to manipulate evidence and evade accountability. The man's resolve deepened as he uncovered the extent of their actions. He knew that confronting them would require not only physical prowess, but also a strategic approach to expose their corruption. The following day, the officers mobilized, their plan in motion. They set a trap, intending to corner their target and eliminate any chance of escape. Collins coordinated the operation, ensuring every detail was accounted for. Graham's eagerness to lead the charge was apparent, his hostility barely contained. As the officers moved into position, the man and Shadow observed from a concealed vantage point. Their training allowed them to remain undetected, analyzing the situation with calculated precision. The man's mind worked rapidly, identifying weaknesses in the officers' formation and devising a plan to exploit them. When the moment came, the man and Shadow sprang into action. Their movements were a seamless blend of agility and precision, honed through years of experience. The officers were caught off guard, their carefully laid plans unraveling as chaos ensued. Graham, driven by a mix of anger and desperation, broke formation and charged toward the man. His aggressive approach left him vulnerable, and the man used his momentum against him, disarming him with ease. Shadow's presence added to the confusion, the dog's sharp instincts and trained responses proving to be a formidable asset. The confrontation escalated, drawing the attention of nearby civilians. Phones emerged as bystanders began recording the unfolding scene. The officers' actions were laid bare, their prejudice and abuse of power exposed for all to see. The man's calculated strategy had worked, turning the tide of the encounter in his favor. As the dust settled, the officers retreated, their plan in shambles. The man stood resolute, his gaze unwavering as he faced them. Shadow remained by his side, a silent yet powerful symbol of their unbreakable bond. The confrontation had revealed not only the corruption within the force, but also the strength and resilience of the man and his loyal companion. In the aftermath, the man and his allies worked to ensure that the evidence gathered during the confrontation would be used to hold the officers accountable. The incident became a rallying point for the community, sparking conversations about systemic racism and the need for reform. The man's bravery and determination inspired others to stand up against injustice, proving that even in the face of adversity, resilience and integrity could prevail. The morning sun had barely risen when the tension reached its peak. On the surface, the town seemed quiet, but beneath the calm exterior, a storm was brewing. Jordan sat at the corner of his modest living room, his loyal dog Shadow resting at his feet. The events of the past few days replayed in his mind, a constant loop of injustice and frustration. Shadow stirred slightly, sensing his owner's unease. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Daniels gathered his team for what he called a routine sweep. However, his tone and the glint in his eye suggested otherwise. Officer Ramirez, the youngest on the force, felt a pang of unease. He joined the department to make a difference, but lately, the lines between justice and prejudice had blurred. As the team assembled, Daniels laid out their plan. The target was a man named Jordan, a retired officer with a spotless record. Daniels spun a narrative about Jordan's supposed involvement in illegal activities, though no evidence supported these claims. The real motivation was unspoken but clear to those who knew Daniels' history. Ramirez hesitated, glancing at his colleagues. Most nodded in agreement, their expressions unreadable. He wanted to speak up, but the weight of his inexperience held him back. The group dispersed to prepare for the operation. Back at Jordan's house, Shadow's ears perked up. The dog's sudden alertness broke Jordan's train of thought. He followed Shadow's gaze to the window. A police cruiser rolled by slowly, its occupants casting pointed looks toward his home. Jordan's instincts, honed from years of military service, kicked in. Something was off. He moved to his desk, pulling out a small device from the drawer. It was an old scanner he'd used during his time in the field. Turning it on, he caught snippets of police chatter. Words like apprehend, resistance, and contain sent a chill down his spine. They were coming for him. Jordan's mind raced. He hadn't done anything wrong, but experience taught him that innocence didn't always guarantee safety. He reached for his phone and dialed a trusted friend, Lisa, a local journalist with a knack for uncovering the truth. Lisa picked up on the first ring, her voice laced with concern. Jordan explained the situation, and Lisa's determination flared. She promised to dig into the matter and keep an eye on the scanner frequencies. Jordan thanked her and ended the call. He turned his attention to Shadow, who watched him intently. They needed to be ready. The police team mobilized. Daniels led the charge, his demeanor confident, bordering on arrogant. Ramirez trailed behind, his stomach churning. As they approached Jordan's neighborhood, Ramirez couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a mistake. He glanced at Daniels, whose sharp gaze brooked no dissent. Inside his house, Jordan prepared. He wasn't one to cower, but he knew better than to confront a team of armed officers head-on. He secured his important documents and grabbed a small bag containing essentials. Shadow followed his every move, his loyalty unwavering. The sound of vehicles pulling up outside signaled the team's arrival. Jordan took a deep breath, his mind sharpening. He moved to the back door, intending to avoid direct confrontation. Shadow stayed close, ready to follow his lead. Daniels barked orders as the team fanned out. He approached the front door, his hand hovering over his weapon. Ramirez watched from a distance, his unease growing. He spotted Jordan and Shadow slipping out the back and hesitated. Should he alert the others or let them go? Jordan moved quickly, his military training evident in his calculated steps. Shadow remained by his side, silent and focused. They reached the edge of the property when a shout rang out. One of the officers had spotted them. Daniel's voice boomed, ordering them to stop. Jordan paused, his heart pounding. He turned slowly, his hands visible, but his stance radiated defiance. Shadow growled lowly, sensing the threat. Daniels approached, his hand on his holstered weapon. He accused Jordan of resisting and demanded compliance. Jordan's voice was steady as he questioned the grounds for the accusations. Daniels smirked, his true intentions barely concealed. The standoff escalated. Ramirez watched, torn between duty and conscience. The other officers closed in, their postures tense. Shadow's growl grew louder, his protective instincts kicking in. Lisa arrived on the scene, her camera rolling. She'd followed the scanner frequencies and knew this was her chance to expose the truth. Her presence added a new layer of tension. Daniels glared at her, his annoyance evident. Jordan seized the moment. He spoke directly to Lisa, recounting the events leading up to this confrontation. His words were calm but powerful, painting a picture of resilience in the face of injustice. Lisa's camera captured every word, her focus unshaken. Daniels' patience snapped. He ordered the officers to apprehend Jordan. Ramirez hesitated, his internal conflict reaching its peak. He stepped forward, his voice shaking as he questioned Daniels' actions. The other officers froze, unsure of how to proceed. Jordan stood his ground, his gaze unwavering. Shadow's stance mirrored his owner's determination. The atmosphere crackled with tension as the officers exchanged uncertain glances. The impasse broke when Lisa called out, her voice firm. She warned Daniels that his actions were being recorded and would face public scrutiny. Daniels faltered, his confidence wavering under the weight of potential exposure. Ramirez took a deep breath and stepped between Daniels and Jordan. He declared that this wasn't justice and refused to participate. His words carried a conviction that silenced the others. Daniels' fury was palpable, but he couldn't act without further incriminating himself. The tension eased as the officers slowly backed down. Jordan remained vigilant, his trust not easily regained. Lisa continued recording, ensuring every detail was documented. Daniels' frustration boiled over. He barked at the team to retreat, his plans unraveling. The officers dispersed reluctantly, their expressions a mix of relief and shame. Jordan exhaled, his resolve unbroken. He turned to Lisa, expressing his gratitude. Shadow nudged his leg, his loyalty a source of strength. Ramirez lingered, his decision to stand up for justice a turning point in his career. As the scene cleared, Lisa promised to expose the truth. Jordan nodded, his faith in justice slightly restored. Shadow wagged his tail, sensing the shift in his owner's mood. The confrontation had ended, but the fight for accountability was just beginning. Jordan knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready. With Shadow by his side and allies like Lisa and Ramirez, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The air was thick with tension. Officer Daniels paced in the precinct room, his hands clenched into fists. He couldn't let Jordan walk away unscathed after the humiliation from the failed operation. He gathered his most loyal officers and outlined a plan with venomous intent. Daniels was determined to end things that night, leaving no room for mistakes. Ramirez stood outside the room, listening to the muffled voices. He knew Daniels wouldn't let this go and felt a chill down his spine. Quietly, he followed them, his fear mixed with determination. Inside the precinct earlier, he had accessed Daniels' plans and knew they were setting a trap for Jordan. Jordan, meanwhile, sat in his home, the weight of recent events heavy on his shoulders. His phone buzzed. Lisa was on the other end, sharing evidence she had uncovered a paper trail linking Daniels to unlawful arrests and intimidation tactics. She urged him to meet her that night and bring everything he had. Jordan agreed, gathering his notes, photos, and recordings, ready for what lay ahead. Daniels and his team converged on a secluded part of the city as midnight struck. Ramirez, keeping his distance, began recording everything he could as evidence. He muttered to himself that staying silent would only make things worse and dialed for backup, urgently explaining Daniels' plans. Jordan arrived at the warehouse, feeling a sense of unease. Lisa emerged, tense, clutching a folder tightly. She barely had time to explain the gravity of the situation before the screech of tires signaled the arrival of Daniels and his officers. They surrounded the warehouse, weapons drawn. Daniels stepped forward, his expression smug and filled with arrogance. He taunted Jordan, certain of his victory. Jordan shielded Lisa and kept his composure, his instincts on high alert. Ramirez watched from a hiding spot, capturing every moment on his phone. He called for reinforcements again, knowing time was running out. Inside the warehouse, tensions escalated. Daniels ordered his officers to move in, but Jordan's calm voice interrupted their advance. He warned them to consider the consequences of their actions. Daniels dismissed the words, confident in his control over the situation. Lisa had called in members of the community, people who had suffered under Daniels' oppressive tactics. They arrived armed with cameras, ready to expose the corruption. Their presence caused unease among the officers. Daniels ordered arrests, but the hesitation among his team was palpable. Ramirez stepped forward, revealing the video evidence he had captured, exposing Daniels' orchestrated attacks and prejudice. Daniels lunged at Ramirez in a fit of rage, but Jordan intercepted him, swiftly subduing him with precise movements. Reinforcements arrived just as chaos erupted, and officers loyal to Daniels clashed with the civilians. Some officers hesitated, torn between their loyalty and the damning evidence before them. The power dynamics shifted rapidly as the truth unraveled. Daniels and his loyalists were taken into custody. Lisa and Ramirez's evidence initiated an internal investigation. Jordan, though exhausted, felt relief as the weight of accountability began to take hold. Justice was finally within reach. The events marked a turning point, sparking conversations about systemic corruption and change. As dawn broke, Jordan reflected on the battle still ahead. Lisa assured him that the fight was far from over and that the world needed to hear their story. Jordan nodded, resolved to continue the journey toward justice, knowing he was no longer alone. The fallout from Daniels' arrest rippled through the department, stirring a hornet's nest of conflicting emotions and loyalties. Chief Collins convened an emergency meeting with the remaining officers. His tone was clipped, his frustration evident as he outlined the immediate damage control measures. Collins knew that Daniels' arrest was just the beginning. The department's credibility was at stake, and he needed to act swiftly to prevent a complete collapse of trust. Among the attendees was Officer Graham, a close confidant of Daniels and a fervent believer in his methods. Graham seethed at the perceived betrayal of their brotherhood by Ramirez. In his eyes, Ramirez was a traitor who needed to be dealt with. As Collins spoke, Graham's mind was already racing, formulating his own plans to restore what he considered order. He exchanged subtle glances with a few officers who shared his views, silently rallying their support. Ramirez, meanwhile, found himself ostracized by many of his colleagues. The courage he had summoned to expose Daniels now placed him in the crosshairs of a growing faction within the department. But he refused to back down. He spent his days meticulously organizing the evidence he had collected, ensuring it was airtight and ready for any upcoming investigations. Ramirez understood the risks but knew that the truth was his only defense. Outside the department, Lisa worked tirelessly to amplify the impact of her coverage. Her reports on the scandal had gained traction, sparking heated debates across social media and drawing the attention of civil rights organizations. She knew the story was far from over and that the real challenge lay in maintaining momentum. Lisa reached out to Jordan, urging him to share more of his story to galvanize public support. Jordan hesitated. The scars from his confrontation with Daniels ran deep, and the thought of stepping back into the spotlight was daunting. However, he recognized the importance of their fight and agreed to a public interview. Graham's plans began to take shape. He contacted a group of officers he trusted, painting Ramirez and Lisa as agitators who were destabilizing the department. He proposed a counter-narrative, that the investigation into Daniels was a politically motivated attack on law enforcement. His rhetoric was persuasive, stoking fears and anger among his allies. They agreed to join him in a coordinated effort to discredit Ramirez and Lisa. Unaware of the brewing storm, Ramirez met with Lisa and Jordan to discuss their next steps. Lisa's investigative instincts were on high alert as she shared information about suspicious activity within the department. Jordan listened intently, his military training enabling him to spot patterns and anticipate threats. They agreed to stay vigilant, knowing the opposition would not sit idly by. The first strike came in the form of a leaked document, purportedly showing misconduct by Ramirez during his tenure. The document spread rapidly, with Graham's faction pushing the narrative through anonymous social media accounts. Ramirez's reputation took a hit as detractors seized on the opportunity to discredit him. Lisa, however, quickly recognized inconsistencies in the document and launched her own investigation. She uncovered evidence linking the leak to Graham and his allies, exposing their attempt to manipulate public opinion. The revelation added fuel to the fire. Graham's faction doubled down, accusing Lisa of fabricating evidence and branding her as biased. Tensions reached a boiling point during a heated confrontation at the precinct, where Graham openly challenged Ramirez in front of their colleagues. Ramirez stood his ground, calmly countering Graham's accusations with facts. The exchange left the room divided, with officers forced to choose sides. Jordan watched from the sidelines, quietly observing the dynamics at play. He saw the fractures within the department and recognized the opportunity to turn the tide. Drawing on his leadership experience, he approached a group of undecided officers and shared his perspective. He spoke of integrity, accountability, and the importance of standing up for what was right. His words resonated with some, planting seeds of doubt in their loyalty to Graham. As the battle for public perception raged on, Lisa received an anonymous tip about a secret meeting between Graham and a prominent city official known for opposing police reform. She brought the information to Ramirez, and they devised a plan to gather evidence. Jordan volunteered to assist, leveraging his skills in surveillance to document the meeting. The operation was risky, but they knew it was a chance to expose the deeper connections behind Graham's actions. On the night of the meeting, Jordan positioned himself near the rendezvous point, equipped with a discreet recording device. He observed Graham and the official exchange documents and discussed strategies to undermine the investigation. Jordan's pulse quickened as he captured the incriminating conversation. But his presence didn't go unnoticed. One of Graham's allies spotted him and raised the alarm, forcing Jordan to make a swift escape. The chase through the city was intense. Jordan relied on his military training to evade his pursuers, navigating the urban landscape with precision. He eventually reached a safe location and contacted Ramirez, handing over the recordings. The evidence was explosive, linking Graham to a coordinated effort to obstruct justice. Ramirez and Lisa wasted no time in presenting their findings to the Internal Affairs Division and the press. The fallout was immediate. Graham and his allies faced intense scrutiny as investigations into their activities expanded. The department's leadership was forced to act, suspending Graham and several officers implicated in the scheme. The city officials' involvement sparked outrage, leading to calls for his resignation. Public support for Ramirez and Lisa surged as the truth came to light. Despite the victory, the cost was high. Ramirez continued to face hostility from colleagues who resented his role in exposing the corruption. Lisa endured harassment from detractors who sought to discredit her work. Jordan remained cautious, knowing that their fight was far from over. They had won a battle, but the war for systemic change was just beginning. As the dust settled, the trio regrouped to discuss their next steps. They knew the journey ahead would be arduous, but their resolve was unshaken. Together, they pledged to continue their fight for justice, determined to dismantle the structures that enabled corruption and rebuild a system rooted in accountability and fairness. The final confrontation was inevitable, and everyone involved felt the weight of its approach. Chief Collins had no choice but to acknowledge the unraveling chaos within his department. He gathered the remaining officers, his voice firm as he demanded accountability and transparency. The investigation into Daniel's network had spiraled into a full-blown crisis, exposing a web of corruption and complicity that extended beyond the department. Collins knew he was walking a tightrope, trying to salvage the department's reputation while confronting the reality of its failures. Graham, now cornered, clung to what little power he had left. His suspension had only fueled his anger, and he became increasingly desperate. In secret, he contacted a group of loyalists, urging them to rally against what he framed as an attack on law enforcement. His rhetoric grew more incendiary, tapping into their fears and grievances. Graham promised them vindication, but his words masked his own desperation. Ramirez pressed forward with his efforts, despite the mounting hostility from within the department. He worked closely with Internal Affairs, providing detailed accounts and corroborating evidence. His determination was unshaken, but the strain was evident. Each step forward felt like walking through quicksand, with resistance from both known enemies and reluctant allies. Ramirez understood the stakes and pushed himself beyond exhaustion, knowing that the truth needed to prevail. Lisa's investigations had unearthed a trove of information, each discovery more damning than the last. She worked tirelessly to connect the dots, piecing together a narrative that left no room for doubt. The public's interest had reached a fever pitch, and Lisa used the momentum to shine a light on every corner of the corruption. Her reporting was relentless, but she faced an onslaught of attacks aimed at discrediting her work. Threats became a daily occurrence, but Lisa refused to back down. Jordan remained a quiet but steadfast presence. He supported Ramirez and Lisa, using his skills and experience to navigate the complex dynamics at play. Jordan understood that his role was not just to assist, but to inspire. He reached out to community leaders, veterans, and others who could lend their voices to the cause. His words carried weight, and his actions demonstrated unwavering resolve. Jordan's quiet strength became a rallying point for those fighting for justice. The culmination came when Graham and his loyalists decided to take matters into their own hands. They orchestrated a plan to disrupt a public forum where Lisa, Ramirez, and Jordan were set to present their findings. Graham's goal was to silence them and seize control of the narrative. The plan was reckless but fueled by the loyalty of those who still believed in him. The forum began with tension already thick in the air. Lisa stood at the podium, her voice steady as she outlined the evidence. Ramirez provided detailed explanations, each point backed by irrefutable proof. Jordan spoke last, his words measured but powerful, addressing the systemic issues that had allowed corruption to thrive. The audience listened intently, their reactions a mix of outrage and determination. Graham and his loyalists made their move, disrupting the event with loud accusations and attempts to discredit the speakers. Chaos erupted as they pushed their way toward the stage, their intentions clear. Security intervened, but the tension boiled over into physical altercations. Ramirez stood his ground, facing Graham directly. The confrontation was intense, with both men voicing their convictions. Ramirez's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Graham's rage, highlighting the divide between them. Lisa continued to document everything, her camera capturing the raw emotions and unfolding drama. The footage would later become a critical piece of evidence, showing the lengths to which Graham and his allies were willing to go. Jordan stepped in to protect Lisa and Ramirez, his presence a steadying force amid the chaos. His military training came into play as he defused tense situations and ensured the safety of those around him. The turning point came when reinforcements arrived. Officers who had been swayed by Jordan's words and Ramirez's integrity stepped forward, confronting Graham and his group. The tide shifted as the loyalists realized they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Graham's defiance crumbled, and he was taken into custody along with his closest allies. The disruption had failed, and the truth prevailed. In the aftermath, the forum's message resonated more powerfully than ever. The community rallied around the fight for justice, demanding accountability and systemic reform. The investigations expanded, leading to further arrests and resignations. The department underwent a comprehensive overhaul, with new leadership committed to rebuilding trust and integrity. Lisa's reporting became a cornerstone of the movement, her relentless pursuit of the truth earning widespread recognition. Ramirez emerged as a symbol of courage within the department, his actions inspiring others to stand up against corruption. Jordan's quiet leadership continued to guide the effort, his presence a reminder of the strength that comes from integrity and resilience. The journey was far from over, but the momentum was unstoppable. Together, they had turned the tide, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, justice could prevail. The final chapter was not one of closure but of new beginnings, as the fight for accountability and fairness continued to shape their path forward.